You've been living in a dream world, Neo.
We have been brainwashed, for real.
Yeah.
My whole life is a lie.
The whole George Floyd story was a lie. So, was Black Lives Matter a scam?
Well, we've already
They exploited
Yeah.
black people for
But-
profit.
Name one good thing Black Lives Matter has done for any community.
My whole life has been a lie. And I'm just finding that out in 2023, though.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Everywhere we turn today, we're warned about misinformation and disinformation. And when we are given information, it seems like the goal is to put us in formation. I broke my arm today. On purpose. I'm not clumsy. You see, the human body is amazing. And if we inflict a small dose of trauma now, then if an accident ever happens in the future, the body adapts and it won't hurt. It'll still hurt, but it's prepared. And, I feel like I'm explaining it wrong. The science is sound. Don't knock the science. It happens in doctor's offices every day of the week. It's like sexual assault. If I hire a pimp to sexually assault me, just the smallest amount, then if it ever happens in the future by accident, I'll be ready. No, that's dumb. I've made a terrible mistake. The hero's journey is the discovery that everything you know is wrong. And it's true in story because it's true in us, regardless of our training, theology, or education. Remember, Plato's entire philosophy is based on the fact that sensory input traps us in a cave of illusion. All perception is projection. We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. And if we can't trust our own senses, then why would we ever trust someone else's? Especially now that we know at least half of all scientific research papers are wrong, and that the government can legally lie to us.
Our eyes and ears take in electrical signals which our brains interpret based on our expectations. We don't see reality. We see our reality.
So how do we get out of the cave? How do we know if the information we've received is legitimate, or just more social engineering designed to achieve a predetermined outcome? Is anyone telling us the truth? Or is every crisis a manipulation of the Hegelian dialectic in order to shift the Overton window? Well, there's a litmus test you can run to figure this out. If the outcome of an event is a loss of liberty or an increase in taxes, it's manufactured. Apply this to everything, even World War II, and you'll realize no one wins a war if they have less freedom after the war than before it started. Evil always has the same tell and makes the same argument. Our knowledge of truth justifies our control. It's impossible for a moral, healthy human being to hold this view. Truth never requires censorship. The things you can't question are always a lie because questioning is the only way to know, and no one on the side of truth will ever mind being questioned.
I think it's become clearer that fairness is overrated. The idea that we should always give two sides equal weight and merit does not reflect the world we find ourselves in.
The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
Anyone who says trust the science or trust the experts is gaslighting you. The problem is that people who don't live in reality are dictating our reality. But when did that start? And why? There's only one story because there's only one cycle, and countries are no exception. Those in the know have been warning us of America's place in that cycle for a while, but unfortunately, not many of us listened. The danger comes when people use it to their advantage, manipulating others by calling it fate or God's will. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about the fall of Athens, Rome, or the United States, it always takes the same form. You see, people learned long ago that it's far easier to use a nation's laws and policies against itself than to risk an invasion. Why? Because once corrupted, a system can't self-correct. You can vote yourself into tyranny, but it's impossible to vote yourself out of it. This is why Thomas Jefferson said we need to have an armed rebellion every 20 years. Believe it or not, everything that's happening today occurred 100 years ago, even down to the same headlines. This is partly because there's only one story, but it's also because the same group responsible then are doing it again.
Most, if not all, that has transcended in the last 60 years was designed to get us closer to accepting such a dystopian reality. Whether you care to accept it or not, we live in a hyper-controlled matrix where our perception of reality is meticulously planned, managed, and executed in order to control and steer us in whichever direction they wish.
Now, it's just not worth the hassle to openly talk about this group, but I encourage you to look into them for yourselves. And remember, that doesn't mean a quick internet search. If you use Google to do your research, it means you haven't done any. This group said that America was immune to military invasion due to the Second Amendment, so they decided to erode the country from within, and they started by taking over Columbia University in 1934. Now, there isn't a single school in the country that has escaped their influence. This takeover is so complete that our nation has earned the nickname, Why America?
In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system.
Almost every social or political view we hold today was decided for us 100 years ago. Everything we protest, donate towards, or vote for is by their design. And it's all based on the simple truth that a house divided against itself can't stand. The fall from paradise is always into division, which is why their plan required replacing the e pluribus unum melting pot with a quilt of squares, dividing the people into as many victimized groups as possible, a trick they learned from the sophists in Athens. The result is a nation of trauma where the only solution presented drives us further into isolation and conflict. Their plan then called for slowly installing draconian legislation camouflaged with pretend care for one of the victimized groups. All of us have been tricked into participating in our own demise.
What if I told you that the government was about to take complete control of the internet? What if I told you that they were going to use black people to do it? Under the guise of preventing digital discrimination, that's exactly what the government intends to do. The 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, number 6 says, centralization of communication within the hands of the states, not only using black people to take control of the internet, they're using black people to push communism.
Even issues that once sought equality were hijacked into an us versus them mentality. But it's all based on a lie. The game ends once we realize it's impossible to empower ourselves by disempowering someone else. But we don't see it because we're not allowed to. This is due to information warfare. It's when someone presents propaganda as legitimate data by controlling the context through which the data is presented. Whoever controls the language controls the argument, and they do so by releasing controlled opposition to keep the other side discussing pre-approved counterpoints. Anyone who talks about real issues is painted as fanatical. But over time, the other side calluses to the insults, and the only way to stop them is through censorship. Remember, censorship is always on the wrong side of history. Their goal was to have citizens participate in their own destruction by calling it progress, to create new norms by destabilizing traditions and manipulating language. Phrases like social distancing or social credit scores only work if a population buys the lie that we live in a society, something that would have been considered absurd until this group took control. But the Overton window moves slowly, and it has to be done in stages, which are then tested to see if anyone notices. A famous example of this is giving someone a peace prize and then having them openly brag about killing innocent women and children. Every cycle gets a test of consent, usually under the guise of safety. Ours involved an illegal, illogical, and immoral lockdown. We actually had counties shut down that didn't have a single case to excuse the shutdown, which should terrify all of us, regardless of our politics. Under a real crisis, the government has to force people out of their homes, never the other way around. And all of us know limiting safe or healthy people due to unsafe or unhealthy people is evil. The cycle shows that if there isn't punishment for the perpetrators, the nation falls. There is no other outcome. And remember, anything people don't give consent to is illegal, which is why jury nullification exists. It really is the last possible way to save our country, which is why no one is taught about it. Another reoccurring warning in the cycle is when an expert with zero experience dealing with an issue is placed in authority over that issue. And we've all witnessed the danger this causes. The law of mean terms tells us that the hero must be a psychopomp who starts in one world, travels to the next, and in the end is a master of both. Why? Because authority can't be academic in nature. It only comes from the trenches. Before a country falls, its institutions fall, and anyone who's paying attention can point out how the ideology of this group has corrupted our military, education, and banking systems. But what about medicine? Do you remember what used to happen when you received a diagnosis from a doctor? You were told to seek out a second opinion, because that's all it was, an opinion. That all magically changed in 2020. We all know that you are what you eat, but doctors are no longer trained in nutrition or diet. And it's all thanks to Rockefeller. He took over medicine around the same time he took over education and media. Before Rockefeller, medicine was holistic, and there wasn't much money in it. Doctors would travel to a patient's home and could be paid with a good meal, which Rockefeller didn't like because it didn't put anything in his pocket. So he created the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research and rewrote all the medical books to promote a drug-based curriculum. And don't forget, he also had a monopoly on pharmaceuticals. Hemp was used to treat all kinds of diseases, but Rockefeller didn't like it, so he had it outlawed. Not only did he cut the amount of doctors in the country, but he forced them to ignore prevention and focus on symptoms. Suddenly, the land of the free no longer believed in choice when it came to health. And now the world of medicine is trapped in a military hierarchy where anyone who thinks for themselves loses their license, regardless of the success they've had with their patients. The result is that psychotropic drugs kill over 40,000 people a year. Every single comparison I could find between holistic and allopathic medicine shows holistic medicine coming out on top. But again, doctors don't care because medicine has become a business. And that desire for profit has turned doctors into one of the leading causes of death in the nation. The best way to understand the change in medicine is to look at its symbol. The Greeks considered this guy to be the first doctor, and his staff represented healing. The problem was that he was too good at his job, so the gods had to get rid of him. That's right, the powers that be removed him because he was bad for business. His staff was replaced with this one, which is used today by 76% of all commercial institutions. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask.
No, I don't think it should be mandatory. I wouldn't demand to be mandatory, but I would do everything in my power. Just like I don't think masks have to be made mandatory nationwide.
You don't have to lock down if you're wearing the mask.
To unleash the full power of the federal government in this effort today, I am officially declaring a national emergency. Two very big words.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
We now know that we have been lied to by the very people that claim to be protecting us, and we have been lied to repeatedly.
None of us have ever witnessed a debate or news report where the data presented could pass as evidence in a court of law. So why do we waste our time listening to them? Escaping Plato's cave requires looking in a direction that's frowned upon. Why? Because truth is never popular.
I was an officer. We were both assigned to the Child Victim Sexual Assault Unit. And what really sparked some surprise and shock in us was the amount of children that actually do die of quote unquote SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. One thing that we started to notice was a pattern of when these children would die. It would usually be within hours to a week of their immunizations. And I would say most commonly this would happen after the 6-month immunizations. The one thing that they wouldn't ever put down was that the child had been recently vaccinated. And that really, I found that odd, because if there was any other pharmaceuticals involved, like a round of antibiotics or Tylenol or whatever, that was certainly on the report, but not vaccines. And so I started doing my own digging, and I found out that because vaccines do not have liability, the manufacturers do not carry liability, then the medical examiners were not obligated to put vaccines on the medical report.
It's always important to protect the voice of the minority from being drowned out or censored, and I think that's how I'll end my video. The following are quotes from doctors I believe deserve to be seen before Google erases them forever. But since we don't live in the land of the free or home of the brave, I've had to remove some of the words. So let's make it a game. Each missing word is a sacred cow connected by its Latin root. See if you can guess what's missing. There's a lot, so they're gonna go kind of fast, but you can pause it if you're interested. The choice is up to you, which is exactly as it should be. There's only one story. There's only one person in that story, and that person is Moo.